Greg Street, who's perhaps better known as Ghostcrawler, just announced his new game studio called Fantastic Pixel Castle Studios, with their first game being a AAA MMO experience, which is a super lofty ambition for a studio's first title, but there's plenty of reasons to believe that they can pull it off. The first is the team working on it. The studio announcement included a bunch of people who are already working at the studio, and it's a group of true industry veterans who absolutely know what they're doing. Every single person on this list has worked on something that you know and has more than a few impressive things on their CV. Now, there's a lot of people here, so I'm going to be really strict with myself and just call out a few. I don't want to spend all video talking about people's LinkedIn profiles. It's kind of weird. Anyway, to start with, we have Brian Helinka. He spent 2 decades designing combat systems. The first decade was on games like Battlefield and Homefront, and then the second decade has been on World of Warcraft. He's never really been afraid to do interviews. I've seen him in a ton of World of Warcraft interviews, and he very clearly knows his stuff. He seems to care deeply about the player experience. He's a good guy to have on the team, I guarantee it. The second person to call out is Candace Thomas. She's another MMO veteran developer. She worked on World of Warcraft for 13 years. She did a bunch of stuff around encounters and world design when she was at World of Warcraft. She then moved to Amazon to work on Lord of the Rings, their MMO that they're building, as well as New World, and then she went to Riot to work on Riot's own MMO under Greg Street, and of course now works for Greg Street again at Fantastic Pixel. She made the train fight in Blackrock Foundry, and that fight was great. So on that alone, 10 out of 10 for me. The third person is Lisa Ohanian. I can't actually pronounce that. She hasn't actually worked on MMOs from what I can tell, but she did work on Valorant. And if you know anything about Valorant's production rate, it's insanely fast. I did a video on Valorant quite a while ago now, probably, and I do talk about their patch cadence, how it was insanely fast. They got through so much content in such little amount of time, and anyone with that kind of experience can only be good for Fantastic Pixel. It also seems they didn't burn out their team doing it, which is incredible. I don't really know how they did it. And lastly, certainly not least, we have Shanti Blees. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. I'm very sorry. He is a world builder, writer, editor. He's got 10 years experience working at Riot. And whilst we don't know exactly what he worked on, I'm sure maybe there is something on the internet I could find, but I don't want to stalk him, so I didn't. But Runeterra's world building has been pretty great over the past 10 years that he's been working there. And I can only assume he's had a hand in a lot of the lore that we've gotten over the past decade. So really, really pleased to have him on. That was really tough to just pick 4 people. I just want to say Graham Berger. He has 10 years experience working at World of Warcraft. Cam Dunn worked on Dirt Track Racing, which is a massive blowback to my childhood, but more relevant stuff. He did 3 years as technical director on Guild Wars 2, and he did 5 years as the tech director on League of Legends. So I couldn't stop myself. That's 6 people. I've done it. The other thing they've done is they've shared what their core values are as a studio, one of which is to partner with players, and that is a common thing that's spoken about by game developers, but it's usually something that only happens, if at all, when a game has already been released. This studio has only existed for 6 months. There's no game to show us yet, but they're still going to host a Twitch presentation next week to talk about what they want to achieve with their game and to get our input as gamers at such an early stage. It's a system that Larian Studios has been doing for almost a decade, and they've released 3 incredible games. So it's almost certainly a good approach, even if it does feel risky on the surface of things. I would love more game developers to be open about that stuff. I think it's really good for the industry. But what about the game itself? Obviously, for such a new studio, we don't know much, but we do know that one of their core goals is to bring the social community aspect back into MMOs. It's a trend I've observed over the past decade as games like World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2, Star Wars, I Need to Breathe, and Elder Scrolls Online seem to favour primarily stories that are experienced alone, with the exception of a raid here or there. In terms of the world, it does seem to take place on a shattered land with unfamiliar shards of land masses that could very well be from other worlds floating high in the sky. And it's the job of the players to find a way up to those shards in order to gain the power from them and the materials from them needed to rebuild a shattered city. And what form that shattered city takes as it's rebuilt is influenced by the players and the decisions that they make. Those explorable shards in the sky are categorized as blue shards or red shards. Blue shards seem to be private instances for you and your friends to kind of chill out, gather resources, build bases, and do all the typical survival game stuff. Whilst the red shards sound like they're essentially the same, but with a ton of other players competing over limited resources. And in order to succeed in a red shard, you'll need to work with those other players in order to get to the end game content. On the surface of things, it sounds a bit like Rust. If Rust had a PvE element, I could be completely misunderstanding their intent entirely. That's why they're having these Twitch streams to clarify these kind of things with players and see what they want, which is fantastic. They are also avoiding the classic fantasy races like orcs and elves in their game. They want something unique, and that's great. Guild Wars 2 has a bunch of unique races, and that game is better for it. And finally, the last thing is that they are a remote studio with 3 open roles, and sadly, I am not one of those, so I cannot apply for them. But if they do ever need a data program manager, you'll be sure as fuck that I'll be putting my... Oh, I shouldn't swear. You'll be sure as high heaven that I will definitely be applying for that role if it ever comes up. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and as always, goodbye.